Hi, I'm Colleen Davis, your Delaware State Treasurer, and I've started this new project where we discuss with thought leaders in Delaware and across the nation, especially discussing some of the things that interact with my office in the Treasury. Today we have joining us both John Krimmel and Jen Appel from the NEPC. For those that do not know what the NEPC does for the state, they serve as our investment consultant to the Cash Management Policy Board. Without them, we would be really unable to navigate around the risks and to determine some of the conditions to make big decisions for the state. Could you expand on your relationship with the Treasury Office, as well as the Cash Management Policy Board, and what the benefits of that arrangement are for Delaware?
Sure. First off, thank you very much for having us today, Treasurer Davis. We've really enjoyed working with both you and the Office of the State Treasurer. As mentioned, my name is Jen Appel. I have worked with the office and the Cash Management Board since 2017. And this is personally a really interesting relationship for me. Treasurer Davis, I don't even know if I've told you this, but my grandmother, who is currently 92 years old, was treasurer for the town of East Hartford, Connecticut. So that is certainly a little bit different than operating an entire state, but I use that to say that that is something that I've been long interested and around. So I'm very excited to be working with Delaware from that standpoint. So from more of an investment perspective, I really focus on trying to understand what's happening in the market environment and how that will impact the state's portfolio. We also try to think a little bit more from a forward-looking perspective. So John and I will take some forward-looking views and assess if we need to make any adjustments to the portfolio, and then communicate any suggested changes there with the entire team. But at the end of the day, we're really focused on making sure that your investments are positioned appropriately given what's going on in the market backdrop.
Our role with the Cash Management Policy Board is really to provide strategic advice and counsel to the organization. In doing that, we've worked with the board to develop an overall investment program, objective, and structure. And structurally, about 2.5 years ago, we really changed the focus of the portfolio to ensure that the three primary objectives of safety, liquidity, and yield, in that order, really resonate throughout the entire program. And while others perhaps were seeking to increase yield at the expense of safety and liquidity, I think the Delaware program really got it right when it came to the pandemic, because we were already positioned on safety and liquidity, and yield being a third order issue at that time. So in addition to structure, we've worked with the board and staff and the state and you on developing guidelines and policies to really implement the program. And then finally, we do on a monthly basis assess what the portfolio has done and how has it performed, and has it, more importantly, performed in line with our expectations given the market environment that we've been in. So.
How has your focus changed with regard to what clients are looking for as a result of the current climate, and sort of what's going on for folks?
Yeah, well, we've obviously seen just a lot of volatility this year, especially if you think back to March when the pandemic started spreading, and there was a lot of uncertainty around that. So we saw the sell-off in markets, and investors got pretty spooked, I would say, across the board. But even now, we're sitting in a really challenging environment. If you think about the S&P 500 index and other equity indices that are pretty expensive, and then in bond markets, interest rates and yields are at record lows. And then also layering on top of that, a lot of economic uncertainty with the unemployment numbers that are coming out, economic growth figures, among other things. So that backdrop and all of those factors certainly change how we think about things on a go forward basis, particularly since, there's still a lot of unknowns with the pandemic. So across the board, I think we've been stressing to our clients to hold some cash and safe haven assets in case we see some liquidity issues like there were earlier in the year. But for Delaware specifically, I think liquidity is a little bit less of an issue because of some of the changes we implemented over the last few years. But you also have the rainy day fund and the budget stabilization portfolios that can be drawn on if needed.
So especially now with the present challenges of COVID, sort of circling back to the economic downturn that we're seeing across the nation, I know that the state of Delaware has had to adapt, and due to our smaller size, it's a little bit easier to remain nimble. I use the analogy, it's much easier to turn when you're riding a motorcycle than when you're on a big bus. You can pivot and navigate a little bit more quickly. What is your take on that, on the size of a state, its ability to weather the storm, and whether or not you think Delaware's size is a benefit or a drawback?
No, I think that's a great analogy. And before we jump into that, let me say one of the things I think that you are blessed with as the state treasurer and the Delawareans are blessed with is that you have a very seasoned cash management policy board. This is the policy level board who helps make decisions for the state's portfolios. And this group of individuals that serves on your board has been around. They have a very long tenure. And if I go back, they've seen the market crash of 1987. They saw the tech bubble burst in 2001. They've been through the global financial crisis in 2008, 2009. And this board doesn't react in an extreme fashion because they've been through all sorts of market cycles, market events that allow them to really remain calm, cool, and collected and make decisions. And that's exactly what you want from a board, one that reacts appropriately, but doesn't try to turn that motorcycle too quick and put it on its side and slide down the road, so to speak. The portfolio is really changed such that we now have a tiering effect within the portfolio. We have a portion of the assets invested so that they can be drawn on in a day or two. We have a portion of the portfolio that can be drawn on in a month or two. I know Secretary Geisenberger was one of your previous guests, and he noted that through the pandemic, your revenues relative to other states are of a different nature, and they've held up well through this crisis. And what I would tell you is our reporting and our monitoring supports his observation to the nth degree. And so, the good news is we're not having to turn a battleship here. I was in the Navy, sorry, so I appreciate the maritime comment and the fact that you all are, on the Eastern Seaboard. But we're not turning a battleship. We're turning a 44 or 45-foot motorboat instead. And in your portfolio, we've not had to really turn that too much because we were well prepared for this. And I think it's a real testament of the foresight that the folks on the Cash Management Policy Board had in setting up the new program, and it's worked. And honestly, I think if nothing else, this pandemic has validated the work that was done 4 or 5 years ago and really says this is a good structure going forward.
Talking about the Cash Management Policy Board, they are a group of volunteers. and they share their expertise with us, and it's really been a wonderful partnership. And you guys are just as accessible, so it's been really wonderful to have that continuity, and I've really appreciated it. What would you say are some of the hot issues that are taking place in other states related to public finance, investment strategies, or how varying market conditions are affecting their portfolios? And what are maybe some of those conversations that you're having with folks?
Sure. I think a couple of the real hot issues that are out there right now there are two of them that we're hearing about and speaking with our clients about. First is the CARES Act funds that came as a part of the federal government's response to the pandemic. And in the state of Delaware, you all made a decision very early on to identify those funds, segregate those funds, to track them separately than the other state revenue and expenses, and frankly, invest them fairly conservative. At the time, the original legislation was written and the funds were provided, the state of Delaware had until the end of December, like every other state, to identify expenses and expend those funds and then report back how the funds were expended. You all were handed, $900+ million without a lot of guidance. The guidance has been coming along, but the fact that, again, the policy board and the state treasurer's office under your leadership really did a great job of identifying some of the pitfalls that could be out there going forward with this pool of cash that you were handed. I think the way you've invested it very, very conservatively into government only securities to provide that safety and liquidity has been key. Keeping it kept separately so that you can track it, monitor the inflows and the outflows, so that there is no clawback by the federal government, a year or 2 years down the road. I think that's going to be a headache for some states that because they weren't as thoughtful about perhaps investing those as you have been. So I think the CARES Act funds are one hot topic that as guidance comes out, others are saying, did we do a good job? Did we not do a good job? I don't think the state of Delaware is going to have to worry about that in the future. And then the second issue is what you and Secretary Geisenberger have talked about a couple of times, both at Cash Management Policy Board meetings as well as in your previous Treasury Talks segment, and that is if we have to issue debt during this pandemic, is the state of Delaware in a very good position? You all carry a AAA rating, and I think you said if we could have a higher one, we'd be a quadruple A rating because your finances and your financial house is in very good order. If you have to issue debt, you can easily access the market because of the strength of Delaware. There are a lot of states that are out there that are not in that position. And for those who are not nearly as financially strong, are not going to be able to issue debt and frankly achieve a very low interest rate on those debt issuances. And that's going to be a problem for them down the road when they have to 2, 3, 4 years from now begin to think about how do we repay that debt we've issued. And that is another very hot topic. And again, kudos to the state of Delaware, because with your AAA rating, you basically have the ability to issue as much debt as you want. Not that we would ever recommend or advise that, but you could if you needed to. I do think that you all are in a really good shape with respect to the various issues that are going to come up in the next 2 to 3 years.
I agree. I think we are well positioned. I do like to say that we're quadruple AAA rated because all 4 rating agencies have given us a AAA rating. It's been pretty remarkable to be able to say that. And so I give all the credit to really some of the fiscal guidelines that we have in place and a great relationship with Secretary Geisenberger, as well as our governor and you guys and the Cash Management Policy Board. We've, I think DFAC has been really a strong addition as well. So it's a collective effort is kind of the bottom line there. And I think, I'm proud to say that we're quadruple A rated. I can't say thank you enough. I'm extremely grateful that we have folks like yourselves behind the scenes making sure that we can get through this, that we can navigate these tumultuous waters, if you will. So again, thank you so much for your time today and for your expertise and for all that you do for the state of Delaware.